elbow are extremely disappointing. And I will also say that they also don't jive with what is happening with this bill, with the new bill that has come out that bears only partial resemblance to the discussions which happened at committee. And I think that's the concern, especially concern of the members of the committee who were there, who discussed this, who debated this, and remember quite well the discussions at committee. And if we didn't remember the discussions at committee, we certainly have them here unanswered. Now, specifically what we are talking about is contributions to constituency associations. And under this bill, the contribution limit to constituency associations has been raised, not lowered. Let's be really clear on that. The contribution that an individual can make to the constituency association used to be $1,000 per year, $2,000 in an election year. This bill makes it possible for one person to give a constituency association $4,000. So if indeed these enhancements that the minister speaks of are put in because of lowered contributions, that's just not true, because the contribution limit hasn't been lowered, it's been raised. It's been raised from $1,000 to $4,000. So that explanation just absolutely does not hold any water whatsoever. Furthermore, Madam Chair, I'd like to point out that the idea that the Chief Electoral Officer somehow changed his mind at some point after the committee's discussions concluded, and that somehow that this recommendation made on August 10th was based on a higher level of contribution, but now that the level was lower, that, it would mean things were different. Well, but that's not true either. The old contribution limit was $1,000. The new contribution level is not lower, it's higher. It's $4,000. It's specifically talking about contributions to constituency associations. Now, I will also point out that the Chief Electoral Officer and others in his office were extremely helpful throughout the discussions that we had on this. They were there at every meeting, not just the CEO, but his assistant and legal counsel from the CEO's office. And they were there, and they were extremely helpful as resources, answered a lot of questions that members had. And he was there right until September when we concluded our deliberations. So to suggest that somehow, because things changed, something that the CEO said on August 10th was now changed, strikes me as odd. Because if in fact that recommendation had changed, I would have expected that he would have said at one of the many meetings we had after August the 10th, oh, just a minute, things have changed. And you remember when I said on August the 10th that quarterly reporting really doesn't help? It just does, to me, this comment just does not hold water. There is something fundamentally out of whack here. So, well, that's one way to put it. Now, it has been also suggested, and I think this is also important, that this requirement puts additional stress and additional reporting requirements on the CFOs of constituency associations right across our province, for all constituency associations. But specifically, it puts a burden on those constituency associations that actively fundraise, that actively solicit donations. And when we look at the very helpfully provided disclosure documents, the financial disclosure documents on the Elections Alberta website, we find that in fact the constituency associations of the Alberta New Democrats are particularly inactive in that regard. In fact, they're so inactive that earlier this summer, the young gentleman I introduced earlier discovered that one person is the CFO of some 36 constituency associations of the NDP. One person files 36 quarterly. Well, in a lot of cases, quite frankly, I've looked at the reports, they're just filed blank. They're not even, the zeros aren't even filled in. So there's a whole lot of zero reports. One person is the CFO of 36 NDP constituency associations. And yet the minister tells us here how this is leveling the playing field and how this is enhancing democracy, enhancing transparency within our system. Madam Chair, I simply do not believe that. I simply do not believe that there is anything within here, and if indeed it is true, if indeed her statements are true, then why did they vote down a motion to refer this motion to committee where we could ask the Chief Electoral Officer directly, so why have you now decided that quarterly reporting is something that should happen? So, Madam Chair, this is a reasonable amendment. This is an amendment that has support of all four opposition parties. It used to have the support of all of the government members of this committee as well, including a couple of members who admitted in our committee meetings that they had changed their mind, that they originally had a different mindset, but they had changed their mind. So, Madam Chair, to me it's totally baffling that this minister can take the recommendations of the committee that were passed unanimously, that had the support of the Chief Electoral Officer, and now come back to speak of some discussions that she's had with the CEO that happened as a result of a so-called reduction in contribution limits, where in fact the contribution limit has quadrupled, gone up by 4 times. That somehow now means that this is a good idea. It is not a good idea. And it is very clearly designed to unfairly advantage parties that do not have active fundraising activities within their constituency association. And if you look, and perhaps some of you haven't looked at your own constituency association fundraising or financial statements and financial reports of the Chief Electoral Officer, I suggest that you do. It's very instructive. And it won't take you long. It won't take you long at all, and you probably don't even need an auditor. In fact, if you look at those reports, Madam Chair, you will find that the workload of the Chief Financial Officer for the officers, I should say, there's more than one, although one does take care of 36 different constituency associations, but the Chief Financial Officers that file reports on behalf of that party, the governing party, that is suggesting quarterly reporting is a good idea, have a pretty easy workload. Whereas over on this side, those parties that have constituency associations that actively fundraise, that actively solicit donations, they've got a lot more work to do. And now they're going to make that workload even harder. It only benefits the governing party. And it is unfair. It is completely unfair. And Madam Chair, speaking from a certain degree of experience, hard-earned, I can tell you that Albertans have a tremendous sense of fairness. And when they see something that is unfair, they don't treat it kindly. There has been fundamental unfairness done in the past by governments, and some of it was done by our governing party when we were in government, and we were rightly punished for doing that. And that's fine. And Madam Chair, I acknowledge that, and we have received what we deserved. But Madam Chair, this government promised to do better. This government was, as was coined by my former colleague, well, she's still a colleague, the member for Calgary Northwest. She's still a colleague. The gang that does the things, or the doing things differently gang. That's what it was. That was a great phrase. The doing things differently gang. So the doing things differently gang rides again. Sadly, you're not doing things that much differently. And really, Albertans expect better. Albertans expect much better. So this is fundamentally a fair amendment. It is an amendment that follows a recommendation of the Chief Electoral Officer, as it was stated to the committee, not in some mysterious discussions that happened after the committee finished its work. And I think if indeed the Chief Electoral Officer has had a change of heart, then it is only fair that this matter be referred to a committee that can ask the Chief Electoral Officer why he's changed his mind. But that was suggested and was voted down last night by the government majority. So, Madam Chair, I'm in favor of this amendment. The arguments made by the minister, to me, are absolutely invalid. They are completely fly in the face of what we know to be the truth that was presented at committee. And in addition to that, it suggests that the Chief Electoral Officer's mind was changed, and before that, I would like to be able to confirm that directly by having a conversation with him before we pass this, before we consider defeating this amendment as the minister has suggested. So I would urge all members of the legislature to vote in favor of this very reasonable amendment for the sake of the fairness to all political parties that operate in the province of Alberta. Thank you.